Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, but I just checked my little circular dial, and it says that we only have 45 minutes, so we better jump into this.
Yeah, yes, we're working to the clock, as we always do, and we always keep to that as well. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're still working our way through Black Mirror Season 4, and we're on to Episode 4, Hang the DJ. And this is a paired up by a dating program that puts an expiration date on all relationships. Frank and Amy soon to begin to question the system's logic. So, Julian, what are your initial thoughts then on Hang the DJ?
I mean, I don't think this is a great episode, but I do kind of like it. I mean, obviously the, sort of reveal and, how this all works is a little problematic, but I mean, I do like the sort of possibilities of a dating program, in one of these sort of worlds where you can simulate people's consciousness or whatever. It sort of reminds me of Miracle Woman in Miracle Man, sort of making it her quest to hook people up with their, ideal others. But what were your thoughts?
I hated this episode. I really did. The problem is sort of like with the world building. It was like from the get-go, it was sort of like, they refer to this thing as like there's the they and the them, and it's obviously building to this reveal. They haven't got a clever way of structuring it to get to the reveal, and information just kept dropping. So you have the first date between Frank and Amy, and they know they've got this. They have to click at the same time to reveal. It's stated in dialogue that they have to click at the same time to reveal the expiration of the thing. That then changes later in the episode when he's allowed to look at the expiration on his own. But they keep referring to they and them, and then there's like this whole thing about he ends up in a relationship that he hates. Why can't I walk away? You just can't. And I'm like, what structure is this? Are they in a cult? Because then they keep going to this church thing where there's like, hold on, because there's going to be the one. And I'm like, cool, where's the rest of the world? Why does no one have a job? Why are they all just going to these weird little funny houses? Where do they stay all the other times? Like, it just, like, they seem to hang around this park. And then then it comes to the end of like, we can climb over the wall. What wall? You've never mentioned a wall before. Is this going to be a bit like that M. Night Shyamalan film where there's a good forest and then a wall? No, it's a massive wall with a ladder that climbs all the way up it. It was, and then it comes to the reveal, and they climb through that thing, and it's the 998th time that they've rebelled against the system out of 1,000. It was just, this whole episode was infuriating to me. I even thought like the chemistry felt forced and everything. Like I was like, and then obviously it reveals that they are sentient objects inside a scenario, and I'm like, the other problem I then had with it is if this has been run by some woman, because it goes outside into reality, it's on a woman's phone, and she's like, she's meeting this guy, and it's 99.8% positive that they're a perfect match because it's gone through all these scenarios. And I'm going, well, how do you know that any of these scenarios are legit? Because you've created an environment that doesn't include external relationships, it doesn't include work, it doesn't include all this other stuff. So the scenarios are all invalid. So it's a nonsense. And and also not inside the environment, there are all these sentient beings based on time that they have these things, whether it be 3 days, 5 years, whatever. And then we watch them go through that. We watch them go through a relationship for a year. Is that supposed to be compressed within the app? Is this just something they've... everything in this is arse. I'm sorry. This is absolute arse. And it's the highest rated Black Mirror episode. And it's just the worst storytelling, terrible world building. I hate this thing of sentient beings inside of a computer now. It's driven me mad. It's a story trope that this guy needs to get off quickly.
Yeah. No, I agree with you about that. And I think that is my biggest objection, is like yet another episode in which you can sort of easily and at low cost reproduce a human consciousness perfectly inside a machine. I assume that those simulations are being run on the cloud. I don't think they're actually being run in the phone. But you're right. I mean, there's basically no world building. I mean, I would say I'm less bothered by all those things than you are. I would say that the talk about simulation and then this whole like skipping the rock, it always skips 4 times. What has sort of like, it's kind of poetic, but it's also just like such a lazy, way of establishing it's a simulation. It's like the one little flaw that lets you know, yeah, this is all a simulation. Which is so random, right? I mean, it's like nobody says, "What do we do for work?" Nobody says, But I'm with you, and I think that that may be the worst flaw, that it presumes that if you were able to run these kinds of simulations, you would be able to really successfully pair people up. Whereas in reality, maybe you meet your soulmate and you're just having a bad day and you say the wrong thing and instantly turn that person off, and it doesn't go as planned.
Yeah. Well, this is the other thing as well. Like, I was curious about this thing of like, well, what information have you? This is where my head goes. This is how, like, I know it's a bad episode and a bad story when my mind starts going off and asking all these questions. So halfway through, I'm going, where have they got this data from? Like, what data are they using to make these initial pairings? Like, I know that they ask it in the episode. Like, one of them even says, like, I think we're in a simulation and we're just going through the motions and and then they just give you a pairing and stuff. But like, all I'm thinking is going, yeah, well, how does this thing work? Like, what's it based off? You seem to be quite a limited population, and so what is it basing these pairings on? Like, and then it puts you with someone for a year, and they're both miserable, like, and it's like, well, you just believe in it. It's it's the one. And I know you're supposed to be this idea of dystopian technology, but then the reveal sort of throws all that out the window. And it's sort of, so what was the point of that?
It's not dystopian then, right? I
No.
mean, yeah.
So what was the point of that thing of running it for a year? Like, what was it's just, yeah, it never sort of, this is the problem I'm finding with Charlie Brooker. Like, he has an idea and he'll go, oh, but it's about that. But it never feels like fully thought through.
Flushed out. Yeah.
Yeah. Because the point, the big reveal at the end, I'm going to hammer on this point because it's the one that annoys me the most. When it's revealed that this is a dating, this was a simulation, and they've run it 1,000 times, and then they're going to meet these two people in real life, as you've said, the scenarios are like, I always think of like War Games, that film from the 80s.
Great movie.
Yeah, it's a good film. Actually, we should do it one actually. But they cover off all different scenarios. Like, well, the point of the game is that the computer starts playing all the different scenarios, all the different factors about, like, well, what would different countries do and what would this do and who has the better armaments and so on and so forth. It's playing all those factors in to create the scenario, which comes to there's a no-win. It's a no-win situation. And that's the problem, is that they've eliminated all the factors that actually interfere with people's relationships. Existing relationships, family members, work commitments, hobbies, psychological baggage. There's all this other stuff that's like, in this. Well, none of that was actually laid out in the scenario. It's just a general thing of like what we think the person's like. And in 98 scenarios, 99.8 times, they attempted to break and get out of it.
Yeah, that part bothers me more. I mean, I think you're right that there's not a lot of sort of world building within, the the scenarios, and vis-a-vis the wall and employment and things like that. And you're right about these things affecting our relationships, right? Unless I mean, I could easily see like you identify the right person, but then it's like, right, we haven't factored in how that person deals with work stress and how that affects the other person, right? Like this is completely invalid for that reason. I definitely see that argument. My problem is more with what you identified as like the key thing is going over the wall. Like the idea that a good relationship is one in which you will defy authority and defy the system in order to maintain that relationship. Well, some people are more rebellious than others. Some people will stay in, a situation and are content with, the best, a decent relationship within that, and they're not going to ever go over the wall. So how do you get 99.8? Surely rebelliousness, or ability to, or willingness to break the rules and confront somebody with the stun gun is a lot higher than actually finding your right person.
Yeah. I mean, surely this software then should really be being used by sort of like NSA, CIA, MI6. Right, we're going to use this to identify potential criminals, terrorists. Like scenarios are being played out all the time on these people from this data. Yeah, it's that thing, isn't it? I say it's just. Go on.
But that's what we've talked about before, about sort of like how Brooker has his one thing that he wants to explore, and this is like a Tinder like situation with the ability to run scenarios, with somebody's mind in a computer, right? You don't have to worry about how you get those minds in the computer. He's done it before, it's a trope. I mean, it is annoying, especially at this point in the series, but he's very narrow in his focus, and he doesn't look at. He's not concerned with all the other implications of this technology. Like, why would you use it for this instead of, NSA stuff? Well, maybe it is being run for NSA stuff, but we're not examining that in this episode. I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with the going over the wall is the indicator for, when you found the right person, right? You defy the system. It seems to say a lot more about other personality traits than that you found your soulmate.
Yeah, that's the other thing I sort of find. Yeah, no, the other thing is I get irritated by this idea of a soulmate, this idea of like the one, for the simple fact people change. Alex and I have been married now for 10 years, but like if I'd have met her 5 years before that, like, we wouldn't have got on. Like I was still in my 20s and doing, I was an obnoxious knobhead. It was just, you mature and you change and you do different things, and life experiences takes you down a path. And, if you're lucky, you sort of come across someone that sort of, at that intersection, you can sort of develop together. But yeah, I don't know. It just feels kind of like this thing of sort of going, he's 99.8% a match. And it's just, like you say, going over the wall is the defining factor of this thing of going like, that's what brought them together, is rebelliousness. Cool. Does this result in like a V for Vendetta scenario where like we come back a year later and they've brought down the British government? Like, I don't know. It's yeah. It just let's go into the scenario then. Let's go into because the story, because this is the problem. Like the story becomes so sort of bland. This is, I think I'm finding this a little bit this season. There are bits I can pull out that I usually like with things, but even the story, this thing in the middle, this idea of going from date to date, and I know that they're trying to be satire, they're trying to make commentary when she sort of goes on these 36-hour lots of these 36-hour dates. She meets man after man after man after man. But like one of the things I think that's interesting is this thing doesn't seem to want to make. It's not brave enough to go full satire, right? Because it doesn't want to really offend anyone. Because there is this notion of like one night stands. Some people will just bed hop and they'll go from relationship to relationship to relationship, and this thing. No judgment. That's not, that's the point. It's not really a judgment thing. And then some people will stick out a relationship for a year because they think it's what they want. But but they clearly hate each other, and she even gets bored of this bed hopping thing. But it's like, fine, that's cool, but then do something with that. Like, really try and dig into this as a satire, then, and sort of have it that, like, I don't know. It just feels so sort of by the book, so sort of rote, so sort of repetitive that I'm just like, there's no tension. I'm not bothered by the characters. It's not sweet. It's not romantic. It just kind of feels like a dull, unfunny rom-com at this point.
Yeah, I think it wants to be sweet and romantic. I think it wants to be a clever take on the rom-com. But to your point about, I was more interested than you were about these sort of dead-end relationships, more so the, like, we're going to be together 9 months or a year or something like that. Though that sequence, than the bed hopping stuff. Just because I think a lot of people do stay in dumb relationships, right? But what's interesting about that is, for me, the way that it sort of deconstructs the entire notion of the ending, is that, in that kind of scenario, right? Like, the idea is that they meet, they have this connection, but they've only got 12 hours, right? And then they go through lots of different people, and it only really cements to them how special that connection was with that first person. And then they have this opportunity to do it again, and he screws it up by looking at the dial early. And I guess that's supposed to symbolize that he hasn't matured enough to trust her, and they have this fight. And this is a rom-com trope, right?
Yeah.
Like,
the lowest point, but not before the finale. Yeah.
Yeah, but and also, like, I've got to learn something and kind of like overcome something to be the man that this person needs, or the woman this person needs. And then they wind up running off together rather than meeting their elected soulmate or the perfect match or whatever.
But he
my
doesn't.
question is,
Just to highlight, it's not him that overcomes anything. Like, the reason he looks at it is because everything he's been given has been given a due date. That's the point of the thing. He has this expiration date, and he wants to know. And then when he knows it's 5 years, because he's the only one that's looked at it, it starts to come down, because then he has to confess what has happened. Fine. But then, like you say, then that becomes his lowest point, where he's sort of like moping about it and all this other stuff. But like you say, then she comes back, and there's this whole thing about it being a simulation, and they should rebel, and they should go over the wall. Like, he's not the one that comes through and says, no, we should be together, and I have to prove myself in some, usually it'd be like some sort of dramatic sign of romantic gesture, running to the, someone's front door in the rain, or, the airport, or some other stupid thing they've done in a rom-com. It never feels like, they think. But again, this is what I'm saying, not being brave enough to sort of live up to its tropes, because then it goes, well, we can't do that because that's too, that puts it in the men's sort of category. It's not always, no. It's sort of, they give it to her, but again, by giving it, but they don't do it. They're not brave enough then to go the other way and make it truly subversive. And do you know what I mean? So it never feels like it's doing one or the other.
Well, I think that going over the wall is supposed to be that big romantic gesture, right? That, and,
yeah,
and it has sort of a feel of Logan's Run to me, in this kind of like weird, oddly controlled society with those guards. It seems like it's definitely borrowing from Logan's Run there.
Oh no, I agree. I definitely think that's in there. Yeah.
But my point is that, part of what makes them a perfect match is that they have gone through all these other experiences, right? And come back to each other, right? They don't know at the beginning. It's like, you go, I mean, if you don't have any experience in dating, and, you go on your first date, right? You're trying stuff out. You're going to fail. You're going to screw up. You're going to look back and say, like, I was kind of a dick and I didn't know it, They learn that they, sort of belong together through these experiences, that they can't get over each other. Well, if they meet in real life, they're not those people anymore, right?
No.
So they're going to go through a lot of turmoil before they realize, like, this person is really the one for me, but I've cheated on him. I've spent lots of time away from him. We've had lots of fights, and him too. So, presumably that is in their future in the real world. And during that time, they're going to be like, right, this app has made a terrible mistake.
Yeah.
I'm mad at it. That would be a more interesting story, right? Like them in the real world saying this has made a terrible mistake, and then finding out, maybe with flashbacks or something else, like, oh no, it hasn't made a mistake. It's run this scenario. You've just got to go through all this suffering before you realize this is in fact the person for you. And I am wiser, because I have run those scenarios. But you see what I'm saying? Like,
I 100% agree. I actually 100% completely agree, because I think you're right. One of the things that's sort of frustrating about this episode, you're right, is because it plays or attempts to play like an unfunny rom-com. So let's say it's a romance film. Throughout that story, take off the sci-fi bits. You're right. They go through a character arc. They go through a development that has not happened in the real world. So they've had jokes, they've met other people that have had an impact on them in some way. They've gone through a life journey that has not been replicated in the real world. So that 99.8% saying, oh, well, they're a match, that's good, that's perfect. Like you say, doesn't mean they're going to go through anything. So you're right, it would be better if there was like, almost like a sliding doors scenario. Okay, well, I want to see where it failed as well. Like, what happened to those other two then? What happened when there's two where they didn't come to meet? Have it where there's an alternate thing where, match reality to this.
A Minority Report.
Yeah, kind of scenario. Yeah. I don't know. You're right. And that sort of, again, like, you're not supposed to ask these questions. This is the thing about, I'm finding more, as we are binging this show and working our way through it, the more I'm realizing is you're not supposed to binge this show, because you see these patterns and you see things and you start to go, this isn't as well thought out as people sort of suggest it is. Like, it's not. I'm beginning to feel that the hour format really, really, really damages this show. Like, it feels
that it should be a half hour kind of get in and get out. Here's the idea. You're less bothered by, the lack of, sort of fleshed out implications of that technology, fleshed out how exactly does this world work.
Yeah, exactly. I just feel that it would be punchier would be a bit more effective.
Well, that could even be down to runtime, right? Because there's nothing keeping this at an hour an episode, right? I mean, even if you cut it down to 45 minutes, it's a lot stronger than it is at an hour. And most of these episodes could trim 10 minutes without, missing much.
What I would be interested is, though, right? And this is something we've joked about this before, that you and I are wizened old men of, lives lived and all this other stuff, right? How would it be if we were 20 years younger watching this episode? So two guys in their sort of like, their early 20s. Does this play different, do you think, to a different generation?
I don't know. I mean, I think one thing you identified earlier was this whole concept of soulmates, which I find a pretty ludicrous concept. I mean, it goes back to Plato and sort of, the soul being divided in half, right?
Yes.
And then it's like, right. And the other half happened to be reincarnated, like next to me in Athens I mean, it's a very bizarre idea. I mean, I guess it's a romantic idea, but it's very bizarre. And I think about relationships that I know of people who really have very little in common. But, what really separates relationships that work in the long run from relationships that don't is largely that they just decided to make it work. And sometimes, and I know that seems weird, but it's you can be with somebody who you have relatively little in common with if you're both committed and you give each other the space to do that. And you can be with somebody who you have everything in common with and you love that person and get along with them great, but you drive each other crazy because, every little thing is like, well, then I'm out of here,
Yeah.
And think about like arranged marriages. Arranged marriages have higher success rates than
Yeah.
non-arranged marriages, and it's because the social pressure is you just learn to love that person and to deal with them. Nobody expects you to be happy all the time. It's this Western idea of like, I'm gonna get married and then I'm gonna be happy all the time, and then most of those end in divorce. Well, surprise, surprise, because life isn't happy all the time, and people grow and change, and they're annoying, and they click their mouths when they eat, and they go, ah, they
Yeah.
have that first sip of water, and this stuff starts to drive you crazy, and it drives everyone crazy about every relationship, and that's okay. Um, and it's really, I think, what defines successful relationships is really, you know, the two people, for whatever reason, whether it's, practical circumstances or social pressures or just deciding this is good enough and I love this person and it's wonderful. It doesn't have to be a soulmate, but like I'm at the age and maturity where I do want to settle down and you're a good match and let's commit to this. That's actually a really good relationship, but it's not a soulmate. It's not a
Mm.
perfect match scenario. And to get to that point, you have to suffer and go through those experiences that get you to that maturity point, which then has a lot more to do with a successful relationship than who you're paired up with.
Yeah.
But that's obviously not the paradigm that this episode is coming from.
Well, no. Well, the other thing to go to that point is I was, I'm not a prude by any point, but I was kind of put off by the amount of emphasis it put on sexual compatibility. Now, granted, there is definitely a part of that, like, a gay man and a straight woman aren't going to work so well. Like, that doesn't kind of click, understandably. Like, but there's sort of like the amount of times this goes, well, let's get down to it just because let's see how sexually compatible we are straight away. And I'm thinking, like, well, if that's what you're basing it on, like, your relationships are all screwed anyway, to be perfectly honest. I mean, that's like, that physical compatibility is definitely there. There's a physical attractiveness and da da da. But like you say, it's sort of it's referenced like two maybe more than that, 3 or 4 times of how they're like, they use that sexual compatibility or how good they are in bed as a sort of, well, they're good. There's a the show, it's the episode itself tries to show a risk to Frank. He's with that woman who hates him, and how like they're not sexually compatible, and then Amy's with that Lothario that's he goes down on her, and he's obviously very good in bed and all sort of stuff. And you're like, oh, that's a real threat to this relationship. And I'm like, yeah, possibly, but if he sort of is an absolute dick the rest of the time, well, I'm sort of like, yeah, great, one thing, but like you never see any of the characters sort of go, do you know what I really like reading? The Bronte sisters books, or I'm a massive fan of da da da, or I'm a huge supporter of Aston Villa Football Club. Cool. Where's the connections? Where's this thing of someone going like, oh, I'm not really a football fan, and they go, oh, okay, well, that's not a bit, you're great in bed, but we can't be. It's so sort of shallow in that respect as well that it kind of bothered me after a bit. I was like, I'm bored of this. Like, it's trying to be sexy, but you're boring me because it's not hitting that kind of that emotional beats again.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying, and I think it's interesting. It's worth teasing out. I think that, like, in that sequence, Frank is with this woman who is just a terrible bitch of a person. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And the issue with their sex isn't that the sex is bad as much as just they are utterly incompatible, and she's a terrible human being. She's not compatible with anyone. Let's be perfectly clear, right?
Yeah.
So that is the bigger issue there, but it's presented as a sort of sexual issue, right? But they clearly, I mean, she's terrible, and not that he's perfect, but I mean, she's just a loathsome human being. Now, what she goes through is with this guy who, as you said, is sort of a bit of a Lothario. I mean, he's more open about sex, but ironically, how you're shown that they have no connection anymore is they're sitting in bed reading together, and they're just, and the idea is like, well, they're not fucking right now, so
But
obviously,
exactly.
no, actually sitting in bed and reading together is actually a very nice activity. That's that's part of a healthy, mature relationship. You don't have to be screwing every moment of the day. Um, you know, so yeah, I mean, there is sort of I do kind of see what you're saying.
Yeah, it's I think about I've kind of downplayed rom-coms or anything like that. Romance films aren't my bag, but like I know when rom-coms can work. Like it's much like every other genre, there's a formula that when done well can really work. And there have been ones that I've watched and I thought, kind of good fun. But there is that thing. There's always a moment in the rom-com when you have the sex bit. Like there's always going to be that. But there's always the point when each of the characters does something humane, some sort of act, or does something that connects them to the other person. Like they'll do something. It's that's one of the things I find that's interesting that's not in this. And that what I find with Amy and Frank, it works kind of well. They have these things where they keep bumping into each other, and they have the funny sort of like, the meet cutes where like he chokes and she ends up giving him the Heimlich, and all that stuff's kind of working. And it's they're not so bad together, the two of them. Although I sort of struggle to see. I was struggle to see them as a. I don't know. There's something about them that doesn't kind of match. I think there's a lack of chemistry there actually with the actors. But the meet cutes and stuff kind of work. But it never feels like. It feels cute is the word I'm thinking. Like it feels like a cute relationship, but there's nothing there that goes, this is Romeo and Juliet. This is. This is star-crossed lovers having to escape because they're being pulled apart, they're being kept apart by the system. Do you know what I mean? It never feels like that. And this comes back to this world building. You said about the guards, like when they first meet, they talk about exchanging food. Like he has fish cakes and she has some pasta thing, and and she's always allowed to do that, and it goes over to some looming guy watching them. But you're never told like that's a guard. They're being watched. There's no scene where like they go walking in the park and all of a sudden someone turns them back from a path and says you can't go any further. They're not. The episode never shows you the boundaries that sort of goes, oh, actually, this is kind of creepy. And then the bit where they're like pulled apart, like where the system says no, like there was a reason you two can't be together again. Right? It never feels like there's a real reason for them to go over the wall. Like if they walked out of that restaurant and were like, yeah, let's just do what we want to do. Like, what happens? Where's the consequences? They just keep getting told they can't do it.
Well, this is part of that lack of world building, right?
Yeah.
That and it does strike me that is pretty extreme in this episode. That and that's a good example of the restaurant scene where she says, "Are we allowed to do that?" And he looks back and sees the guard is watching him having eaten some of her food, right? Well, we should know as the audience what the answer to that question is, right?
Yeah.
Like, because we're sort of, at the time, we don't know that it's a simulation, and we assume that guard is a sort of totalitarian, sort of, Logan's Run guard. He's, what they called? Morpheus or, one of those enforcers.
In Logan's Run. Yeah, like the runners.
Yeah,
I can't forget now, but yeah.
Yeah, and so we sort of imagine he's one of the police state, guards, but we never find out like how, like they talk about what happens if we just don't, comply with these termination dates, and we could just leave, and at some point you're told like that's not permitted. But what are those consequences, right? Surely that happens. Why isn't that the more realistic kind of breaking the mold than going over the wall, right? Like, when you stay with somebody longer than the date and you and you're meeting in secret, wouldn't that be a more dramatic and realistic version of, of breaking the system versus
Continually risking
over the wall?
Continually risking one's safety to meet with someone is a better indicator of compatibility and sustainability than going over a wall once.
Right, exactly. No, I agree. Yeah, I mean, it is strange, because we never know whether. I mean, whether they're even allowed to eat each other's food, what happens when
No
people stay
consequences.
longer.
Yeah, I mean,
And it's constantly teased, but seeing those things would be it occurs to me, is a better potential dramatization of you're in a simulation than The Rock skips 4 times,
Yes.
right? Like, The Rock skips 4 times, that's bad programming, okay? Like, I've played Red Dead Redemption, and they've got that figured out. They're not like, let's put this, all Rock skip 4 times, surely as a simulation this complex could get that right. So having, sort of some indication of what happens when you break these rules, some indication of somebody broke the rules and got in trouble, so we have some reason to be fearful, would be a better indication of that, even if we ignored the fact that they don't have jobs and that, all of these things
all
would
of that,
affect.
right? All of that you could deal with, and this is the thing I've just thought about, because it's presented as this garden, and I actually thought about this whilst I was watching it, but I want to advance the theory. So I was like, they live in a garden. It's clearly like, I was like, and there's this whole thing, they have this whole thing about they're not allowed to know what the wider world is, right? Even the app sort of says whatever it is. There is nothing else. You can't leave until you've met the compatible one. You'll be this is the system, all sort of stuff. And all I could think about was the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm.
I kept coming to this thing of like Adam and Eve, and then this thing of knowledge being once they eat from the tree of knowledge, then God casts them out from the Garden of Eden. And I was like, okay, we're getting a bit of an Adam and Eve story, that sort of thing. In that case, then, right, forget it being there seems this is what I'm saying about them not committing to anything. Don't worry about it being a simulation. Don't tell me it's have it as like some really futuristic, have it as like some utopian future. Go go full Logan's Run, go 1984 kind of thing, where they're being watched. I mean, do you know what? That's a good example of this, because that's about an illicit relationship in a dystopian, in a totalitarian controlled, society. You've got models of this working. Commit to it, and then it's when they come out and you realize it's the simulation, but they've been this futuristic world where it's all been white clinical walls and other stuff like THX or something, and then it's the simulation. Like, do something just to give us this full story about how they're having to sort of meet in secret, and at the end of it, it's revealed that, well, of course we knew you were meeting in secret. We knew that was the point.
Right. No, I think that would be a better in simulation idea, sort of test. But no, I mean, I do think this is very flawed. In the outside world, if the outside world is so different, then what's the point of simulating in a totally different world anyway? But you have a micro version of that problem now, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
As you point out, they don't have jobs, they don't have
families or
stressors.
Friendships or exactly.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just sort of feel like, it's maybe you would be more amenable to this at 30 minutes or 45 minutes or I don't know what the runtime is, but these do tend to go on, and they are a little bit in love with themselves, which makes it worse, right? The pretension. But if you take this as a sort of Twilight Zone episode, right? It's just a sort of like, here's an idea. Here's the rom-com episode of Black Mirror, right? It is what it is. It's kind of fine, like, it's not objectionable. It's a kind of teasing out of an idea. It's not a full exploration of that idea, but it's not interested in doing so. It's just doing it at 30 minutes. I think that's the way it wants to be taken, right? But at its current runtime, it's kind of, it only gives you so much time to ask more time, so that you ask these questions that it does not have answers to. Does that make sense? Or?
No, yeah, agree completely. The runtime is definitely a hindrance. I think, yeah. One of the things that I think, it's one of those things that I say, maybe I'm just being a contrarian as well. Maybe that got me more. There's like, because I was so sort of like, well, the end of it was like, another sentient, internal computer episode, and I didn't think the romance worked. The world building was awful, and I was just like, and I look on IMDb and it has 8.7. And I'm just like, how? What? Like, and you look at the reviews, and again, people are like, best episode ever. Oh, it made my heart cry and all this other stuff. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I must be watching a different show. Like, or I've got a heart of stone, apparently.
No, you're right. And I mean, this is the problem with like reception, right? Where you go into a movie and it's like, oh, you've got to see this. This is the best movie.
Yeah.
It's so artistic, and inevitably, I'm going to hate that movie, right? Just because my expectations are so high. Now, sometimes I go into movies with low expectations and I still want to vomit. Rise of the Beast, but you know, low expectations can often help. Where you say, okay, this is perfectly, and I sort of, I guess I'm so tuned out from the Black Mirror community, and I admittedly live in a bubble, right? I live in a liberal bubble. I cannot stand reality. I can't stand people. So I just kind of assume, yeah, people are stupid anyway. So I don't look at these kinds of ratings except to say, oh wow, that's dumb. I mean, I think this is a weaker episode, but I would say it's fine. It is, if this is a Twilight Zone episode at 45 minutes, it's got more time to play out some of those scenarios. I like seeing them in these other relationships and kind of pining for, feeling stuck. I really like that. And thinking, like, why was this a sign? But I also I have to confess, I watch dating reality shows. One of my guilty pleasures is dating reality shows, and I'm often moved by them. I'm often moved by, I know it's all fake, right? But I mean, I'm moved by, people learning, like, to open up and be vulnerable and things like this. So I mean, I don't know. I don't know why.
But you're watching.
People...
So they sound like the good ones. That you said that's like the dating. That's like people talking. Of that, like, I'm glad you didn't say, like, over here we seem to have an obscene obsession with, like, here's some pretty young people on an island who's going to do what, and you're just like, oh my god,
I don't
this
watch
is horrendous.
Like the Bachelor, Bachelorette kind of stuff. I watch, like, Too Hot to Handle, like, I love the Japanese ones. The Japanese ones are so awesome because everybody's so serious. Like, they're so. I'm like, oh, I love these people. The American, Brazil, Germany, all those ones are like.
Alex has watched.
I'm here to fuck. Like, everybody has had sex with everybody by like the second episode, and they're like, I kind of like him, but that guy over there is hot, and I'm like, what kind of people are you selecting for these shows? And in Japan, they're like, I love his openness. I love his patience as he cleaned the floor. I feel like there's something there, but he was a little forward when he touched my shoulder. And it's like poetry. It's amazing.
Well, like I say, the British are very similar, but we've even crude it. It's sort of like, we sort of got on, but she weren't putting out fast enough for what I like, and that sort of thing. Or the women, it's like, yeah, he's wonderful, but he got jizz in my eye, so I can't see us meeting again. And you're just like, oh god, no, please.
Well, this is the real simulation, right? Yeah. The real version of this is jizz in my eye.
That's a show waiting to happen.
He farted after sex, so I don't think I can see him again.
Better than Joran.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
there is a crudeness to all of that.
But you are right, and I think there is that sort of thing, and is again.
No,
I know I do
this. It's a great episode.
No. I think the thing is, like I say, there is a version that you could do this story. I just don't think. I think this is a million miles away. To be perfectly honest, I'm not going to change my opinion of this, and I think everyone who rates this over a 7 is wrong.
Oh yeah, no, that's clear. Yeah. No, I would agree clearly. I mean, I would rate it a 6. So it's fine.
But yeah, I think it's. I'm going to leave it there. My final opinion on this is, like I say, it's. I'm just not impressed. I think I'm kind of like bored of these kinds of. If you're going to do something like this, you need like this whole simulation thing. Then okay, cool, but bring me in with a really sort of good story. And I find this kind of weak and uninteresting for the most part.
I disagree with that. I mean, I was interested. I do think the conclusion this week, but I think one of the strengths of Black Mirror is also its weakness, that it is really good at doling out little pieces of information as you go, right? And the episodes that we've really liked are really immersive, where you don't really know what's going on, but it's still fascinating. And, eventually you kind of learn what's going on, and there might be problems with it, but it works, right? But that's also a weakness. And I think part of the problem is that Brooker and Black Mirror have done that, and done that so successfully. And as a consequence, like, are really confident in their ability to tell a story and pull that audience in. And not have to dole out the world building stuff, right?
Yeah.
That it's like like the first season of True Detective is guys driving around in cars talking about existential shit and occasionally busting somebody, right? And then Pizzololo sort of said, well, people don't want to watch that, so he turned in a Michael Mann film as his second season. But this is kind of the
what
opposite.
I'm going to say, I love that first season of True Detective, and it's phenomenal. But yeah.
Sequart published a whole book about that first season. So, absolutely, it's one of the best seasons ever done of any show. But this is sort of like the opposite, where, like, it's taken this thing that it does really well, which is dole out the information slowly, and the audience not needing answers because it's so in love with the characters and the scenario and following it through, and doesn't need those answers. And it's taken that and said, right, I don't really need to give those answers, right? The idea is good enough on its own. And this is one of those episodes that might kind of disappear up its own ass a little, because it has too much confidence in its ability to present this and have you fall in love with the story of these two characters, forced to go on these, relationships with time limits, which I was more entertained by than you. But I do think it's kind of got too much confidence in its ability to sell that at this point. I mean, we're enough episodes in that's kind of getting old for you.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's it. I'm just sort of, You're right. I think that we'll come to an episode very soon, actually, which I think I actually really enjoyed because of its immersive nature and lack of information. But this, I think, thinks it's better than it is. I mean, I've just got a review. I mean, this one says an amazing love story. This is one of the best episodes in all 4 seasons. So I'm just baffled by it. But yeah, I think you're right. Everything you've said there is right. It's sort of, there's a confidence that's verging on arrogance, and it's like, we can do this standing on our heads, and then when they do, it becomes a little complacent. In all honesty, a version of this, I think, going back, the version of this, the version of this episode that is better by a long shot, now I think, consider it in retrospect, is San Junipero.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I agree.
I wasn't
doing different things, right?
Yeah, but that idea of simulation and emotion and relationship, and I wasn't massive on San Junipero, but it's a much better and emotional episode and a much better payoff and stuff like that. I feel that's a much more successful episode than this. And so I'll stand by that. Anyway,
no, I think I agree with that. I think, if you can approach it like a Twilight Zone episode, it's just like, I've got another idea for a sort of rom-com, episode, that's sort of like, is maybe a little more traditional rom-com than San Junipero is.
Possibly. But
it does need more. It does need a rewrite. I mean, I agree with you, right? I mean, the wall thing isn't necessary. A little bit about these guards and what kind of world this is and why they're not working, and
But let's be clear though, when we do Trekking Through the Twilight Zone, and we get episodes of the Twilight Zone, and they're 25 minutes and stuff that are don't hit the thing. We've said it. There's some episodes that could be longer, some could be shorter, some that are perfect time, but others just don't work. We've called them out as well. I think it's just fair to call these out. Anyway, we have run to time. So, Julian,
Black Mirror is excellent. It's the best show that's ever been made, and this is the best episode oh my god, I understand love so much better because I saw this. It's so romantic, and you just don't get it, dude. You just don't get it.
Yeah, someone's gonna say that. Telling you.
Oh, I know.
Anyway, let's
In
leave
this
it at
world,
that.
someone's going to say that? No.
There's a simulation world where that never happens. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening along. If you really enjoy what we're doing, obviously leave a review. Don't forget. Or more importantly, if you don't like what we're doing, let us know. Like if you disagree with what we're saying about Black Mirror, I want to have that discourse. Come find us at Podtime Space, or even more, if you want a proper conversation, come find us on Patreon. You can give us money and then shout at us. I'm more than happy for that. www.patreon.com/20CG Media. There'll be a link down below. And leave reviews. All your podcast catchers. We're more than happy to hear the feedback, and we want to reach out and, touch you in a really sort of kind of vile way. I know that went really wrong then. I'm not going to edit that out. Yeah. I'm not. Because listeners,
in the context of this episode and, sexual, exploration.
Awakenings, yeah.
Can I ask one question at the end? What do you make of the title in Hang the DJ that, I do kind of love. No, yeah, but it's like, I kind of love, I love the song despite,
it's a good song.
Yeah. But, but the whole episode is called just what song is playing in the real world when they meet.
Yeah, it's a good job the song they were playing wasn't, Who Let the Dogs Out. It'd be a completely different thing. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll see you on the next episode.